What's up, guys? Back with another Fallout 4 video, and I'm sure this is a subject that's been talked about before, but I wanted to go ahead and talk about why destroying the Institute may actually be a bad idea for the various factions and the people of the Commonwealth in Fallout 4. Now, before we start, it's important to mention that there are a number of good reasons for destroying the Institute. After all, the Institute kidnaps and replaces people with synth body doubles. The Institute is responsible for the creation of the super mutants in the Commonwealth. The Institute has shown that they will destroy entire settlements like University Point to suit their own purposes, and if Nick Valentine is to be believed, the Institute subverted the efforts of town leaders across the Commonwealth from forming the Commonwealth Provisional Government by killing the delegates. So for all of those reasons, it's understandable why the people of the Commonwealth don't like the Institute and wouldn't mind seeing it being destroyed. With that said, I do want to talk about why destroying the Institute may actually be a bad idea. So let's start with the obvious and then navigate our way to the more obscure. As is mentioned by several key NPCs in Fallout 4, destroying the Institute would potentially be bad for humanity's future. This is because the Institute possesses technology that is far beyond the Brotherhood of Steel and possibly even what the Enclave are or were capable of. After all, you've got to admit that it's pretty difficult to compete with the Institute's teleporters, their synth robots, and their team of highly skilled researchers. If anyone in the Commonwealth had the potential to restore the Commonwealth to its pre-war state, the Institute has the know-how, or at the very least, they would have the potential to figure it out. By destroying the Institute, you're losing not only the technology, but many of the people that developed those technologies. And while I suppose whatever faction that sides with the sole survivor may be in favor of losing some of these technologies, along with the people that developed them, others may have benefited from preserving it. A great example of a technology that would be lost would be the ability to actually create the synths in the first place. While this may not be such a bad thing in the eyes of the Brotherhood of Steel, it is possible that the Railroad's synth membership may eventually regret destroying the Institute's facilities. Maybe some Generation 3 synths in the Railroad might want to be able to propagate and create more like themselves. However, without the Institute's robotics lab, they aren't going to be able to. Now, perhaps these same synths could eventually rediscover how to create Generation 3 synths through some sort of reverse engineering, but who knows how long that may take to rediscover. And if you ask me, a better solution in the Railroad's case may have been to simply occupy the Institute. This way, it would ensure that they freed the synths, and they would still have the ability to make more. There's also the possibility that many of the Institute's highly skilled researchers would be lost in the Institute's destruction. People like Dr. Lee and her team that worked in advanced systems, or Clayton Holdren and his team who worked in bioscience, could be extremely useful for any of the three factions to have. As an example, while the Brotherhood may not be so interested in bioscience's work with the Generation 3 synths, I do think that they would be interested in the biosciences team's work with things like genetics, crop production, and pharmaceuticals. There's also the research from Advanced Systems that went into the development of the Institute's own laser weapons and synth armor that may prove to be invaluable to either of the three factions. And if either of the three factions managed to recruit former Institute engineers to their side, it would greatly improve their own technologies. By blowing up the Institute, each of these three factions could potentially lose invaluable expertise in these particular fields. Something else that should be considered is the actual Institute facilities themselves. While we certainly think about the technology that would be lost and how it might doom humanity's future, if any of the three factions were able to gain control of the Institute's facilities, they would have access to what might possibly be one of the safest locations in the Commonwealth. After all, you can only teleport into the Institute's facilities, which makes them nearly impregnable. While it seems unlikely for the Brotherhood to want to preserve the Institute's facilities because they want to eradicate what they perceive to be as abominations, I would say that either the Minutemen or Railroad could have possibly consolidated their power by simply taking over the Institute rather than outright destroying it. In fact, I think if the Minutemen took over, it would allow them to establish an effective system of government while acting as the Commonwealth's dominant military force. As for the railroad, perhaps they would be more selfish due to their views on how the people on the outside treat the synths. Either way, destroying the Institute's facilities seems like a waste given how secure it is compared to the rest of the Commonwealth. After all, you're probably not going to have to run into any raiders, ghouls, mirelurks, or super mutants while inside the Institute's facilities. Now for the next thing that I'm going to talk about, I need to show you guys a clip of Fallout 4's ending. It's a shame that Bethesda never took the time to elaborate on this ending, but we never really see the consequences of essentially detonating a nuclear payload in the middle of Cambridge. As you can see in the game, this would definitely kick up a lot of rubble. However, in reality, you would notice far more damage to the surrounding area as well. It's likely that much of the area around Cambridge and extending as far as places like Green Tech Genetics and Diamond City would definitely feel the effects of the nuke's shock wave. So provided the Brotherhood ended up destroying the Institute, there is a possibility that the Cambridge police station may have been destroyed, which would cause the Brotherhood to kill their own men. Or perhaps in the case of the Minutemen, who may be trying to curry favor with Diamond City, the people of Diamond City aren't going to be happy when part of their city has been destroyed. Like I said earlier, provided the player beats the game, they will find most of these surrounding areas relatively intact. Now, granted, there is a big hole where the Institute was, however, much of the surrounding areas and buildings are relatively undamaged. Now, it sort of makes sense why this is the case, because this would likely break certain side quests, but it's also because Bethesda would have had to have redesigned like an entire area of the game. But if Fallout 4 were more realistic, many of these areas would have been destroyed as well. Now, while I'm not sure we would have gotten something like a glowing sea in the middle of Cambridge, much of the surrounding area of Cambridge would have been effectively leveled. In fact, to give you a vague idea of what the destruction might be, I can give you somewhat of a visual representation of the damage. As you can see, we can get a pretty good idea of what the damage would be like. Now, the yellow at the center represents the initial fireball radius, while the red circle represents a 20-pound per square inch blast that would basically destroy all buildings in the vicinity. The green radius would effectively be a 500 rem dose of radiation, which would kill 50 to 90% of the vulnerable population, while the gray circle represents a 5-pound per square inch blast, which would cause most regular buildings to collapse and could potentially kill people as well. Finally, you have the orange area, which represents the areas where people would receive third-degree burns. Ultimately, anyone that got caught in this area may not necessarily die, but they would be greatly injured as a result of the blast. Now, if you look closer at parts of this particular map, certain landmarks that we see in Fallout 4, like Fenway Park, which is basically Diamond City, Trinity Church, which is close to Trinity Tower, all fall within the blast radius's orange ring, and many of these people and the super mutants in the area would be greatly hurt by the blast. And as you might expect, pretty much all of Cambridge would have been affected. Other landmarks we see in the game, like the Bunker Hill Monument, Old North Church, parts of the Boston Commons Park, and Faneuil Hall, might only receive a relatively moderate amount of damage. To be fair, it's worth mentioning that the nuke map image you're looking at here is for what would be a surface blast. Given that the Institute is underground and the energy is being released underground, it may also be possible that the damage that's being outlined in this picture is inaccurate. Plus, you also have to suspend your disbelief, as Fallout is fantasy, but with that said, the destruction of the Institute does seem like it would destroy a considerable amount of the area surrounding it, and it's a shame that this isn't reflected in the game at all. For that reason, perhaps a post-Institute destruction Commonwealth would be a good mod idea. So while I can understand the motivations of the Brotherhood of Steel for destroying the Institute because they wanted to purge the Commonwealth of evil technology, as it were, I don't really see why either the Minutemen or Railroad had to blow up the Institute, especially when it's kind of looking like that both of them are shooting themselves in the foot. My only guess is that with the Minutemen, there are so many common people among their ranks that are afraid of the synths that that's all they can really think about. Thus, when the Minutemen soldiers enter the Institute, their fear of the synths overwhelms them, thus leading to the destruction of the Institute. One of Desdemona's comments on whether the player will help the Railroad save the synths or not may indicate that the Minutemen could not be convinced to preserve the Institute's facilities.
You think the Minutemen won't help the synths?
The Minutemen are a reflection of the character of the Commonwealth people. And time again, that character has been proven to be rotten. The synths are tangible receptacles of their hatred of the Institute. Order them to help, and they'd mutiny.
As for the Railroad, my only guess would be that the attack force is simply too small to occupy the Institute's facilities. Still, it seems like this wouldn't matter as the sole survivor convinces some of the synths to rebel against the Institute. Between the Rebel Institute synths and the Railroad, and the fact that it looks like the sole survivor seems to destroy the entire synth army on their way to the reactor, it seems like the Railroad could have just taken over the Institute rather than destroying it. In fact, I think what would have made for a really great alternative Railroad ending would have been for the Railroad to take over the Institute by simply wiping out Father and the rest of the Directorate. Ultimately, destroying the Institute seems like a pretty bad idea. Between the lost technology, the loss of skilled scientists, the loss of the Institute's facilities, and the massive destruction caused by actually blowing up the Institute, I would say that the costs of destroying the Institute could potentially outweigh the benefits. After all, is it worth it when Diamond City residents possibly have third-degree burns and massive parts of Cambridge are utterly destroyed? Probably not. I suppose, to be fair, these areas that should have been affected by the blast end up being fine in the game, but even excluding that, I have to ask if it's in the Railroad's best interest to destroy the Institute and not just simply occupy it. After all, they would possess all that technology, and they may even be able to reform the Institute into something far more positive. But alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. This video was requested by a subscriber, and I thought it could be a fun topic to discuss. Otherwise, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.